Hi, my name is Jeremy, and I read fantasy books. Okay, I read a lot of fantasy books, and because I read a lot of fantasy books, I have a tendency to look up fantasy books online, to find my next read, as it were. And because I look up all these books online, it informs what is known as the algorithm, in which it informs my social media that, hey, this guy's interested in fantasy books. And because I've informed that algorithm that I liked fantasy books, on purpose or not, that tends to mean that the algorithm, in this case Facebook, will once in a while show me photos that might pertain to my interest in that subject, as it were. And thus, I came across this photo. Martin, Rothfuss, and Lynch. I've read all three of these guys and some of their assorted books. George R. Martin, everybody knows George R. Martin. He's a household name. He has worldwide famous series through House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones and all the success that those come with and all the products that those come with, in which you can buy from your average nerd store or even just, your Chapters or Barnes & Noble. For crying out loud, his name even sounds like an author's name. G.R.R. Martin. If that's not an author's name, I don't know what is. Patrick Rothfuss. Now, when I found him first, it wasn't actually because of his books. I actually found him first from a Dungeons & Dragons kind of stage show / podcast known as Acquisitions Incorporated, in which he plays a character named Viari, who's actually influenced from his books.
This seems like it might be an unexpected avenue of attack, and they are engaged with other opponents. Can I sneak attack with a chandelier?
My brother actually introduced Rothfuss to me as soon as he found the books, and he's definitely one of the reasons why I got into fantasy to begin with. His books were wonderful to read. I read them through very quickly when I was in university and was reading all sorts of other things, and that's a statement and a half. Along with that, Rothfuss is arguably the measurement when it comes to prose in book reading, where the poetry in writing books all of a sudden shows how important it is with Rothfuss. Scott Lynch is probably the least well known of these three authors. He is the author of the Lies of Locke Lamora, the first book in the series called the Gentleman Bastards series, and because he wrote Lies of Locke Lamora, he has therefore written what is technically my favorite book. If not critically the best, it is certainly my favorite book, so he definitely has a lot of appreciation there. And this brings me back to this photo, where all three of these books have been noted to have announced their next still unreleased books at best a dozen years ago. Martin with The Winds of Winter. Well, we can say that he has been, a bit distracted, with his assorted shows, Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, catapulting him into a household name for sure. But he seems to be getting, let's call it distracted, I suppose. Everybody would note that he has a blog for the NFL now, and everybody's kind of got questions around that. His health seems to be a significant factor in whether or not he can write or not. There's kind of a debate on how long he's going to continue living for, which comes with its own problems for finishing a book and a series, naturally. And he seems to have been largely lacking interest. There becomes a certain point where do you want to keep working on a project that you have been working on for so long, right? And Martin seems to be having that discussion with himself, as it seems. Rothfuss with The Doors of Stone takes on a bit of an interesting turn. Rothfuss is by far and above the most debatable, the most conflictory of the three, as it were, mostly because when it comes to Rothfuss's interaction with his fans in regards to the book itself, he's kind of conflictory. He makes plenty of promises in regards to the release of his book. Thus far, he's rarely ever maintained. An example that I can think of, when he streams. It's pretty common that when he streams online, which he does often, a lot of people will wind up asking him when the third book is going to release, when's Doors of Stone going to release. And it's become a trend where he tends to get quite irate with this question. He gets asked it all the time, and he's starting to get annoyed by the question itself. Along with that, he's got a kind of charity scandal going on / has happened. He was gonna partner up with a certain charity and therefore fundraise it, and as a part of that fundraiser he was going to release excerpts from his third book when a certain amount of fundraising had been done for this charity. That fundraising happened pretty quickly, very easily. But he still hasn't released those excerpts. Nobody really knows what's going on there, and it seems like it's going to be just an unfulfilled promise. He never kept that money, but in terms of giving the promise of releasing those chapters from the Doors of Stone, he has been unsuccessful in doing that. Another thing with Rothfuss that's kind of strange is that he keeps on releasing these novellas. One of them is really good, actually, The Slow Regard of Silent Things. People are starting to debate whether or not he's using these novellas and the world building that comes with them as kind of distractions for his audience to stop people from thinking too hard about just how he has not released that third book yet. Scott Lynch with The Thorns of Emberlane. Again, he announced that this book was going to be released about 12 years ago. It has not been released yet. An interesting turning point. He's unique in the three in the fact that he kind of has the most positive outlook from fans in terms of why the book hasn't been released. When he communicates with his fans about the book, he apologizes that the book has taken as long as it has been, and he certainly does not seem to be combative with his fans or trying to, wave off their criticisms about it. He has been honest in regards to why the book hasn't been written, mostly in the vein of him struggling with mental health issues and his mental well-being, and that being as crippling as it can be, stopping him from being able to create a product that he's been particularly happy with. That being said, and this is all hearsay, but it seems as if he's the most likely to release of the three. He seems to be the closest in terms of actually getting the book done and giving it out to the world. Now, I want to go back to the photo, because this specifically reminds me of a kind of discussion, and that discussion is whether artists have obligation as artists or whether artists have an obligation as makers of product. All three of these authors are considered to be quite successful. I don't think that there's much of a debate around that. But the discourse around their unreleased books has become much louder than the discourse around the books that they have released. Oddly enough, when I think about this discussion, I actually think of a quote from Jeremy Clarkson, the car reviewing guy, in which he is reviewing a certain car known as the Alfa Romeo 8C, a car that he deemed as kind of worthless as a car, but beautiful, right? In that review, he winds up talking about what art is for, and he uses the proper definition of art, which is it can only really exist for its own sakes. It's not really designed to have purpose.
A man from the Tate Gallery told me the other day that a car can never be art, because for something to be art, it can have no purpose other than itself. No function.
For authors, this is something that's well understood, because authors understand, especially when they're first starting out, there's no obligation for people to read their books, for people to pick up their books. There's no obligation or a promise to those authors that they're ever going to find an audience. And at times, if they do find an audience, it can be very late into the careers. Most people forget George R.R. Martin, he started off as a science fiction author of middling success. It was very late into his career when Game of Thrones really started taking off, and he only really catapulted with the success of his show. He's an old guy. This can happen very late. Again, if it happens at all. With certain successes, all of a sudden the perception of artists really changes from producers of art to producers of product. All three of these authors have found monetary success in the release of their books and the fan bases that have come around them. With that success, though, consumers tend to have less patience for the artistic process, or the artistic method, as it were, in regards to finding the next product. And I'm very specific with my words there. They are no longer viewing these artists as making art anymore. They view them as making products. Thus, we go back to the photo, where we consumers have been waiting patiently, in question marks, for the next product that these artists are making. The discussion has changed from the production of art to the production of product. And with that comes a very different change in attitude. To be clear, this is not a new discussion. If we talk about the Italian Renaissance, for example, if I mention Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Caravaggio, what do all three of these artists have in common? Most of you guys aren't Italian Renaissance nerds, so I will fill in the blanks for you. They're all known for having a whole lot of unfinished works that have not been released, that have not been set out in the public for people to enjoy. They tend to have the same issues as Martin, Rothfuss, and Lynch, but we don't look at them the same way. Well, why? Even if they have the exact same core issues surrounding their works, they are all monoliths of the different kind of artistry that they're involved with. I'm wondering, first of all, if we think of them all in different terms, first of all, because of the age of the internet, and therefore the kind of age of clarity. The internet has become a massive repository of information and an understanding of how all the assorted industries of the world function together. With that, the clarity of the process of making might have made people a lot less understanding for the creative process as a whole. It becomes less excuses. I think that the ethics of the paycheck ultimately come into question because all three of these authors have become successful, in varying tiers, but still successful. Sympathy for them in regards to the success that they have already found all of a sudden becomes a lot less when it comes to making their next product. They're not seen as having the excuse of they're trying to break into authorship anymore. And if they don't have that excuse, why do consumers need to wait for the next book to come out? And in that, I'm wondering if this might be another example in the varying capacities that exist in the world of the unknowledgeable consumer as a whole. What do I mean? I believe that we, and by we as meaning consumers as a whole on the international stage, we need to be better at being consumers. Most of us don't make art for a living. Therefore, we can't necessarily understand all the struggles that come with being artists for work and therefore trying to please a massive and wide audience. We just don't get that. I think along with that, as consumers, and especially as consumers of media, we're very impatient these days. I think about Spider-Verse, right? And the fact that between the first Spider-Verse movie and the second Spider-Verse movie, there was a 5-year gap. And there was a lot of debate about why it took 5 years. Most movies, is understood, can take a year or two to be made. Why did Spider-Verse need 5? So there was a lot of debate around that example in particular. And all of these authors, they've well beaten the 5-year gap between the Spider-Verse movies with their books, right? This might all come back from the internet as well. It stems from the internet in the capacity that the internet, in the clarity of understanding of industries, as well as just the nature of the internet making us a lot less patient about how we consume and how we receive media. I think that the internet itself has made it a lot less patient in regards to when something has been releasing in a series. In that capacity, I think we need to, as consumers, relearn patience. And honestly relearn a bit of grace and mercy that comes with becoming good consumers as a whole. Good, intelligent consumers. Even if the authors have crossed the line with Martin, Rothfuss, and Lynch and just how long they've been taking to make their books. And I think all this stems from us needing to relearn as an audience what we're obligated to or not. Think about what the authors are obligated to or not, right? The authors are not obligated to our attention. Our attention is freely given. Our attention is something that we consent to freely give, but they're never outright deserving of it from the very forefront. I think we as consumers need to take a similar approach. The authors are not obligated to release the books for us. That's something that, if we're lucky, we can get and we can enjoy. But those books are never promised to us in the literal sense. They were announced, but they were never promised that they would actually be released. They hoped that they could be released. So in that capacity, I think we need to re-understand that these authors are a type of artist. And in the capacity of what we've seen with Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Caravaggio, I think we need to recontextualize what it means for them to exist as artists and to understand that they're never obligated to finish a work. Even if they have made wonderful works in the past, they're never obligated to make completed works wholesale. They kind of fluked into their success, and we kind of fluked into having, their media be as good as it was. I think we need to all take a step back and appreciate what's actually obligated to us or not as consumers or as enjoyers of art. With that in mind, I think that's my final thoughts in regards to this photo and everything that comes along with it. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.